As games continue growing and updating, new characters, features, and content are added over time, and with League having been around for 11 years and change, it's gone from a modest selection of 40 to well over 150 champions, each one having their own unique identity and playstyle. Well, at least they try to have a unique playstyle. Needless to say, this game is more wild than ever. With north of a trillion combinations of 10 champions, you'll be playing this game for a long time before you see everything. And even then, you'd still have a different experience due to the players. But there comes a time when you start wondering if Riot needs to tone it down a bit with releasing new champions. There is so much wrong with the game. Lots of issues with the game's balance, so many outdated champions who desperately need to be retrofitted to fit modern gameplay standards, yet in spite of the game's egregious flaws, we've been consistently getting 5 to 6 new releases per year. New stuff is good, keeps the game interesting and prevents monotony, not to mention it keeps players on their toes since they have to account for a whole new character with whole new matchups and possible synergies. But each new unit added can entail more balancing, more potential for bugs, glitches, etc. And of course, they run the risk of becoming yet another super crazy champion that half the community wishes never existed, like Yone, Yuumi, Seraphine, Aphelios, etc. Today I want to talk about whether or not there are too many champions in League of Legends, if Riot should stop releasing new ones and focus on the ones already existing, or if they're doing right now is perfectly fine. First thing we have to do is answer a question. Is there an objective maximum when it comes to the number of characters a competitive game can or should have? It largely depends on the genre, because you have to not only consider what the individual characters or units bring to the table, but also how they interact with other characters or units and how they interact with the game environment. If I were to bring in Smash Bros like I always do, Super Smash Bros Ultimate has about 80, which may sound like a lot for a fighting game, especially with all the different attacks they come with, but you have to also remember that those attacks only affect a character's interaction with another character and nothing else. In competitive singles, it's just you versus your opponent. No other macro elements outside of the stage in which you fight on. There aren't items or final smashes to worry about. However, a point of contention in that game is whether or not there are too many fighters that play in almost identical ways. For example, the characters Marth, Lucina, Roy, and Chrom all have extremely similar attacks. And even though there's still a large enough difference to associate a unique gameplay experience with each character, they still do look very much the same to the average person. In that sense, there's only so many fighters you can have before everyone just starts looking the same, just with a differentiating gimmick. Another example would be all the characters that have backflips for up airs like Captain Falcon, Zero Suit Samus, Mario, Ganondorf, things like that. I personally don't have any experience with class-based FPS games like Overwatch and Valorant because I don't play shooters. But based on the fundamental knowledge that I have, the goal of a hero's abilities and properties is to make it easier for them to deal more damage to you and or harder for you to deal damage to them. And there's only so many ways you can design that. If we take a look at 3 different heroes' defensive abilities, Genji can reflect projectiles using his sword, Reinhardt can create a massive barrier that absorbs damage, and D.Va is able to create a defensive matrix that allows her to block incoming projectiles. FPS games in particular can't exactly have a super large pool of fighters because the primary goal is to just run around, shoot people, and avoid getting shot yourself. Even if you add a lot of extrinsic elements to the game, the characters can easily begin to look the same or become more complicated. As a result, there's only 32 heroes in Overwatch. The same holds true for Valorant, which has only 16 agents. Now, I understand it's a new game, but they could very easily have opened up with 50 agents if they saw fit to do so. Shooters place a greater emphasis on the individual player's mechanics, not so much the characters in which they pilot. In fact, adding more is counterproductive to the experience of an FPS. On the flip side, card games such as Yu-Gi-Oh!, Hearthstone, and Magic the Gathering have like how many thousands of different cards? Reason they have so many is because their cards for the most part only do what is said on the card. That and you might have cards that only work within their own archetype. Although, there might be, say, Yu-Gi-Oh! Players who think there are too many cards, especially old school ones, who can't wrap their head around the new types like Xyz, Monsters, Pendulum, or Link Monsters. There isn't a firmly drawn line in the sand for a game having too many or too little characters, but what defines the condition of a roster is each character, card, unit, hero, etc's gameplay experience relative to the rest of the cast. Now we return to League of Legends. Mobas are a bit trickier to figure out than any other competitive game, and that's mostly because the characters themselves don't actually do a whole lot in a vacuum. Again, they only have a passive, 3 basic abilities, an ultimate, and 2 summoner spells, not factoring items of course. At the same time, there's no particular constraint for what a champion is allowed to do with a single ability. In Smash Bros, all forward smashes by nature are designed to hit directly in front of a fighter, or every up air is designed to hit directly above them. In League, a passive can be anything, a Q can be anything, heck, you could have multiple Qs, or you may not even have 3 basic abilities. You can be like Twist of Fate or Vayne and have 2 passives. There's a lot of macro elements in MOBAs that aren't present in other games, opening up the possibility that parts of the Rift, for instance, can indirectly influence them and vice versa. Rengar's an example. A central part of his gameplay depends on his surroundings, having a dash auto attack whenever he's in a brush that literally no one else has. Fortunately, even the most unique and outlandish champions have to be balanced to remain in line with their competition. It wouldn't really be good design for modern champions to be infinitely better early, mid, and late game than a champion released in 2010. If we go by balance, then Riot can add as many champions as they want. Yes, we joke around about 200 years and all that, but no matter how much we complain about X champion being super overpowered, let's be objective here, they aren't to a degree where someone with room temperature IQ can 1v9 games every single time. There's no tier hierarchy like in Pokemon where Bidoof will always beat Rayquaza. But often, it's not the strength of a champion that leads to frustration, rather the experience fighting against them that players tend to pay more attention to. More specifically, it's how every other champion compares to them, not in performance but in actions. Yumi's got a 46% win rate, which means statistically she's performing quite poorly. But that doesn't stop a large portion of the player base from despising her existence and further solidifying the proof that dogs are better than cats. I'm just kidding, I love both. What we actually should consider is whether or not these new champions enhance, equalize, or degrade the experience of other champions in the game. Looking at it through this perspective may then cause a bit of divide in answers. Having more champions certainly decreases the level of monotony in a game, but it can also lead to a decline in attention given to said old champions, and it forms a toxic comparison. Since there can only be 10 champions and 10 bans, more champions means some will inevitably be played less and less as time goes on, and outdated or quote-unquote boring ones will be neglected in favor of flashier, more overloaded ones. That's the entire reason I made Why No One Plays. Most of the champions I talk about are in that series because either A, they aged really poorly, or B, they have some major design flaw or outdated design that Riot needs to address, but they simply choose not to. See, overall reception and response towards reworks have been more favorable than new releases. Volibear, Fiddlesticks, Pantheon, Nunu, Galio, Warwick, Shen, Poppy, Gangplank, Scion have all been viewed as major improvements to their previous iterations. Maybe at one point or another they might have been a little overtuned and needed to be nerfed a bit, or they had some super annoying cheese build like Gangplank back in the Kleptomancy days, but it was really amazing to see these champions go from outdated pieces of garbage to genuinely viable champions with complete and whole experiences. The same even holds true for the not-so-loved ones like Evelynn, Irelia, Akali, Aatrox, and Yorick. Well, Aatrox was actually a fantastic rework, but given the context, he's an edge case. Anyway, sure, there's still a lot wrong with them, but hey, compared to what they were before, it's at least an improvement and definitely not the one-note, one-dimensional playstyle they had before. That same excitement hasn't really been displayed for new releases though. Aside from Rel, Lilia, and Set, a lot of new ones have been met with no shortage of controversy. Now, that could just be due to our aversion towards new stuff, but in comparison to reworks, new releases just aren't as appreciated. Objectively, they all have complete experiences and push the limits on what a champion is capable of doing, which is a good thing. But the shinier new champions look, the more dull and rusted it makes everything else seem. I think what draws players to believe that there are too many champions in the game is not exactly because there's objectively too many, rather it feels like Riot is piling more and more stuff to the game in such a cavalier fashion while abandoning what already exists. Essentially, they're creating a Jenga tower where 3 new blocks or even more are being added per layer while the lower levels consist of 2 blocks or even just 1. The more champions they add, the more it starts to deteriorate those bottom layers, which then exacerbates the issues arising from it. It's almost unheard of for a competitive game of this size to have such a wide design disparity. If you were to showcase Aphelios and Yone right next to Dr. Mundo and Tryndamere to someone who's never played or heard of League, they would think the former 2 and latter 2 are from completely different games. Now, I understand power creep can allow for older content to be rendered virtually useless, but the beauty of competitive games is that usually doesn't happen because one thing can't be so much stronger than every other thing. Usually that only happens in PvE games because they introduce stronger items and characters to take on stronger bosses and dungeons. From a business standpoint, it's somewhat understandable why Riot doesn't enjoy working on reworks as they do making new champions. Reworking a champion also means reworking their skins, and none of those will really net you any profit, especially since most of the ones in need of reworks aren't exactly the most marketable. Cho'Gath, Nocturne, Skarner, and Shaco, they're not exactly making the company all too much in sales relative to newer champions and new skins. All the same, continuously adding more and more to the game while neglecting what already exists will start to cause problems in the long run because anything that happens will require more manpower and more work because there's more champions to fix. Just look at Viego. The guy's been out for almost 4 months and is still not available for pro play because of the sheer amount of bugs. Also, I know many of you watching have been dying for me to get to this part, but there's also an issue with too many champions and not enough bans. We've had the 10 ban system ever since Season 6 I believe, and since then, over 25 new characters have been added to the game. A common counter-argument to needing more bans is that players should just develop the skills to learn how to deal with those champions. But again, it's not so much that players can't deal with them, rather it's just not a fun experience to do so. I'm not saying all new champions are bad and old ones are good, but it's important to be consistent with the degree of old versus new and not simply making old champions have higher numbers and stats, rather actually updating them to fit the modern standards of the game. In a way, that's one thing I think a lot of people appreciate about Smash Bros. From Melee to Brawl to Wii U to Ultimate, all fighters are updated to fit the new game. And when they brought every single fighter to Ultimate, even the lowest played or the most obscure ones were still given some touch-ups. That's why it doesn't feel like Smash Bros. Has a problem with new DLC fighters like Sephiroth or Pyra and Mithra because every fighter, regardless of their strength or viability, offers the same overall essential experience. They made sure that even the worst of the worst, like Little Mac, Dr. Mario, and Ganondorf, still have all the bare necessities to be a complete character. I'm not sure how the situation is in other MOBAs. I know Dota 2 has like 120 plus heroes too. Maybe this problem affects more than just League, or maybe it's not a problem at all. So my answer to the question, does League have too many champions, is no, but actually yes. No in the sense that the addition of modern champions doesn't completely invalidate old ones and oversaturates the game, but yes in that it creates a discrepancy of champion quality and gameplay experience between the old and new. I think I speak for a lot of people when I say if they just made an effort to pull a Fiddlesticks and Volibear rework on all the janky champions, it would make new releases seem less ostentatious because it begets the saying, if everyone is special, no one is. But that might actually be a good thing for the game because it at least ensures a uniform experience regardless of what champion you play. Anyway, what do you guys think? Do you agree with my rationale or do you think I'm full of horse manure? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, a rating would be much appreciated, and if you'd like to see more content like this, consider subbing to the channel. Also, check out the video description down below for links to my Discord and social media, as well as a playlist containing all my discussion videos if you'd like to watch more. But that's it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Take care.